You know how sometimes you plan a trip, get all excited, tell yourself it's going to be the best weekend, and then just a few hours in, something happens and you start feeling off? Like maybe you made a huge mistake? That was me. My name's Kyle, I'm 30, and I've done my fair share of camping trips. I've been to some pretty remote places, so when my buddy Alex suggested we go out to Black Pine Woods, I didn't think much of it. I'd never been there, but it sounded like a good spot. Isolated, quiet, perfect for some time away from everything. It was supposed to be just Alex, me, and my girlfriend Emma, but then, at the last minute, Alex invited his buddy Mark. He said he was bringing a friend, and to be honest, I wasn't thrilled about it. I don't know why, but I had this gut feeling that something was going to go wrong. Still, I pushed it out of my head. After all, it was just a weekend in the woods. What could go wrong? We arrived late Friday afternoon. The sun was already starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air was cool, the kind of crisp that makes you breathe deeper. We hiked in for about a mile to get to the campsite, a spot Alex had picked out because it was off the beaten path. He swore it was secluded so we wouldn't have to worry about other campers. We set up the tents, gathered some firewood, and started a fire as the daylight faded. The crackle of the flames was nice. We cracked open some beers and the guys started talking about old high school memories, while Emma and I tried to relax. But here's the thing. From the second we arrived, I felt this weight on my chest. Like something wasn't quite right. I know that sounds strange, but trust me, it wasn't like any other camping trip I'd been on. I kept glancing into the trees as if I was waiting for something to happen. The silence between the sounds of the fire, the crackling leaves, and the distant call of a bird was unnerving. Then, as the sun finally set and the fire lit up the area, something happened that made me feel even worse. Alex, with his usual cocky grin, pointed into the woods. Anyone else feel like we're being watched? It wasn't exactly the kind of thing you want to hear while sitting in the dark, miles from anywhere. Dude, what the hell? I laughed nervously. Stop messing with us. But the look on his face didn't change. His eyes darted into the trees. No, seriously, there's someone out there. Man, you're tripping, Mark said. He was already a few beers in and slurring his words. Emma, trying to lighten the mood, smiled. It's probably just animals. But Alex wasn't having it. No, I'm serious. There's something moving over there. It's too quiet, too still. I should have laughed it off, should have brushed it aside as one of Alex's usual overactive imaginations. But I didn't. I could feel it too. There was something wrong. The trees didn't move in the wind the way they should have, and the night had that dead, still quality that didn't sit right with me. We decided to ignore it and just enjoy the night. We played some cards, made some small talk, but every so often I would catch myself staring into the trees, waiting for something to break the silence. Around midnight, the fire was dying down and the temperature was dropping. Alex was the first to go into his tent. The rest of us stayed by the fire, trying to make the most of the night. That's when I heard it, a faint snap, like a twig breaking. I froze and so did Emma. We both looked toward the trees at the same time. It was quiet again, and I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the sound came again, louder this time. Did you hear that? I whispered to Emma. Her face was pale. Yeah, what is it? I stood up, trying to act calm, but I was already feeling the fear creeping in. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it in the direction of the sound. The beam cut through the dark, scanning the trees in a wide arc, but there was nothing. Probably just an animal, I said, trying to sound like I wasn't worried. But the air had thickened around us. I could feel my heart rate pick up. Another snap. This time it was closer. I turned to Mark, who was laughing, but it wasn't the kind of carefree laugh he usually had. He seemed uneasy, too. All right, I'm going to bed, he muttered, walking back to his tent. But Emma and I didn't go inside. We stayed out by the fire, staring into the dark, waiting. Then we heard it again. A footstep. Definitely a footstep. No animal could step like that. It was unmistakable, too deliberate. Like someone was pacing around the camp, staying just out of the reach of the firelight. I felt a cold chill run through me. "Did you hear that?" I asked Emma, my voice shaky. She nodded, but she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I could tell she felt it too, the same wrongness in the air. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal, of course. We were miles out, and I realized just how vulnerable we were. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. I mean, what could it be? It could just be a hiker, maybe someone lost, but I didn't believe that. And then, just like that, the sound stopped. The silence was deafening. The wind rustled in the trees, but that was it. No footsteps, no rustling, nothing. It was as if whoever or whatever had been out there had decided to disappear. I wanted to go to bed, but I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The next morning, when we packed up and headed out, the sense of unease didn't lift. In fact, it grew stronger. As we hiked back to the car, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching us from the trees. None of us said anything about it on the way back, but when we were on the road headed home, I saw Alex glance at me from the rearview mirror. He wasn't smiling anymore. "We're not coming back here, right?" I asked, my voice tight. He looked at me and then back at the road. "No, never again." We didn't talk about it again after that, but I know we all felt it, whatever it was in those woods watching us. It wasn't a bear or some random hiker. It wasn't anything I could explain, but it was real. It's been almost 3 years, and I still can't shake that feeling. I can't even think about Pine Hollow without feeling that creeping unease in my stomach. Let me start from the beginning. I'm Jacob, 27, and like a lot of people, I used to love the idea of camping. The fresh air, the campfires, the quiet. Sure, I had heard all the stories, People say stuff like, the woods are eerie and you're never alone out there, but I thought that was just people trying to make it more exciting than it really was. Until one weekend when everything changed. It was supposed to be a simple trip. Me, Nate, and Anna. The three of us had been friends for years, and we thought it'd be a good way to get away from the grind. No phones, no distractions. Pine Hollow was this little spot about 2 hours outside of the city. It wasn't exactly remote, but it felt like it. And when Nate found this secluded spot along the creek, we all agreed it would be perfect. So we piled into the car that Saturday morning, all packed up and ready for a weekend in the woods. Honestly, I wasn't totally into it, but I didn't want to be the guy who ruined the trip, so I went along with it. The drive wasn't bad at first. The roads got a little narrow the further we went, but nothing crazy. It wasn't until we passed the last little town that the vibe started to shift. You know the kind of eerie quiet I mean? The kind where the trees start to feel like they're pressing in on you? Nate, of course, didn't notice any of it. He was too busy joking around, cranking the music in the car like we were just driving down a suburban street. But the further we went, the more I started to feel like we were heading into, I don't know, somewhere we shouldn't be. And Anna noticed too, though she didn't say anything at first. We finally made it to the campsite, and I'll admit it looked perfect, like something straight out of a brochure. There was this old wooden bridge that crossed the creek, and the forest just felt so untouched. The trees were thick, the air smelled fresh, and the only sound you could hear was the rush of water and the occasional rustle of leaves. We got everything set up, but there was something about the place that felt too still. Maybe it was the fact that we were the only ones there, or maybe it was the way the trees stretched so high they blocked out most of the sky. There was just this feeling that something wasn't right. That night we built a fire. We were sitting around having a few drinks, laughing at some dumb story Nate was telling. It was supposed to be relaxing, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept scanning the trees, half expecting someone to step out from behind them. And then it happened. We were all talking, Anna and Nate were going back and forth, and then, snap, a twig broke. It came from the woods, from somewhere just outside our campsite. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or something, but then, right after I heard it again, closer this time. And it wasn't just a snap, it was the sound of someone stepping carefully on the dry ground. "Did you hear that?" Anna asked, her voice just a little too quiet. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I shrugged it off, probably just an animal. But even I didn't believe it. The sound wasn't natural, it was too deliberate, too heavy. Nate didn't hear it at first, but when I pointed it out, his face shifted. He looked toward the trees, his expression hardening. I didn't like the way his eyes narrowed, as though he was trying to make sense of what was out there. But then he just laughed it off and started telling another story. It didn't feel right, but I didn't want to ruin the night. We had been talking about this trip for weeks. So I stayed silent, tried to relax, but I couldn't shake that feeling. It was like we were being watched. I kept glancing around the clearing, but nothing was moving. Still, the air felt heavier, like someone was standing just outside the light of the fire, waiting for us to slip up. By the time it was really late, I think all of us were feeling the same tension. Anna was quiet, her eyes darting toward the trees now and then. I don't know if she was scared, but she wasn't herself. Nate suggested we go for a walk just to get away from the fire, and Anna immediately said no. I don't blame her. But we ended up walking anyway. The three of us went along the creek, our flashlights cutting through the night. There's something unsettling about the forest at night, something that makes every shadow seem like it's hiding something. We walked in silence, every little rustle of leaves making me tense. And then, there was another sound, footsteps, just ahead of us. But not from the trees, not from behind us. This time they were in front. I froze. Anna grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. There was no mistaking it. Someone was out there. We turned back toward the campsite, and I'll be honest, I didn't want to go back, but I wasn't about to leave Anna alone. We hurried back, but when we got to the clearing, the fire was still burning, but Nate wasn't there. That's when the panic started. We called for him, but there was no answer. We checked the tents, the woods, the creek. He was nowhere to be found. It didn't make sense. We were only gone for maybe 20 minutes. How could he have disappeared like that? And that's when we heard it. Nate's voice coming from the woods. "Jacob, Anna, I'm right here." But it didn't sound right. It sounded off. Too calm, too distant. We followed the voice, walking deeper into the trees. The flashlight beams cut through the dark, and I could see nothing, just shadows and movement I couldn't explain. Every time we thought we were getting closer, the voice would call again, just out of reach. It took us hours to find him. He was sitting on a rock by the creek, staring blankly at the water. He didn't even look up when we called his name. It was like he wasn't really there. When he finally spoke, his words were empty. He told us he hadn't moved, hadn't gone anywhere. He didn't remember leaving the fire. We packed up and left right then. It didn't feel like a vacation anymore, it felt like an escape. I don't know what happened to Nate, but I'll never go back to Pine Hollow. I don't care what anyone says. Something was out there that night, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't human. You ever get that feeling when something's off but you can't quite put your finger on it? Yeah, that was me. My name's Matt, and this story, well, it's not easy to talk about. But I think you need to hear it, because honestly, it could have happened to any of us. Any one of you. It was supposed to be a simple trip, just a weekend to get away from everything. You know, the kind of trip where you turn your phone off, leave the emails behind, and just breathe. There's this spot I knew about, tucked deep in the woods, Hollow Pines, a small, quiet clearing by a creek. Just perfect for camping. I'd been there a few times before, and it was always peaceful. No drama, no distractions. So I invited my friends, Derek, Jenny, and Chris. We were all in our mid-20s, but you know how it goes. We still acted like we were kids sometimes. All of us were overdue for a break, the kind of break where you forget about responsibilities and just enjoy nature. When we got there, everything seemed fine. The sun was bright, the air crisp, and the only noise was the wind moving through the trees. It felt like the world was a million miles away from the chaos we'd left behind. We set up camp near the creek, got a fire going, cracked open some beers, and just chilled. For the first few hours, things were normal. Derek was joking around, Jenny was talking about some work drama she'd left behind, and Chris was complaining about how he hated sleeping in tents. Classic Chris, right? As night fell, the atmosphere shifted. You know how the forest can feel different at night, even when it's perfectly calm? It gets quieter, like the trees are holding their breath. The fire flickered, casting long shadows, and we all felt it. A little too quiet, like we were being watched. But that's probably just your mind playing tricks, right? I tried to shake it off, tried to focus on the conversation. Then came the first weird moment. Jenny, who had been sitting near the fire, suddenly got up and looked into the dark edge of the woods. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice shaky. We all stopped. Of course, we heard nothing. Just the usual night sounds. Crickets, a distant owl. "Come on, Jen," Chris said, laughing. "It's probably a raccoon or something." But Jenny didn't laugh. She just shook her head, looking uneasy. No, this was different. Like footsteps. Like someone was walking, just out of sight. Now, don't get me wrong, I thought it was a little strange, but I didn't think much of it. I mean, we were in the woods. There's wildlife. People hike in and out of places like this all the time. "Probably just a deer or something," I said, trying to brush it off. "Nothing to worry about," we all laughed. But it didn't make the tension go away. Still, we went back to talking, joking, trying to distract ourselves from the creeping feeling that something was off. As we sat around the fire, the wind picked up, rustling the trees above us. That's when it started. A faint scratching noise. It was coming from the edge of our camp where the trees grew thick and dark. At first I thought it was just some branches rubbing together in the wind, but no, this was different. The sound was too deliberate, too persistent. Scratching, like something or someone was trying to get through the forest underbrush. I stood up, trying to pinpoint the direction. "Anyone else hear that?" Derek squinted into the dark. "Yeah, but it's probably a fox or something." But Jenny was already backing up toward the tent. "That's not a fox. That sounds like someone's trying to get through the trees." Chris laughed, though there was a nervous edge to it. "Come on, we're all a little jumpy. Let's just chill." But none of us could relax after that. Every sound from the woods felt like it was closing in on us. We all tried to focus on the fire, the flames dancing, but that didn't stop the noise. The scratching. It came in waves, loud, then quiet, like whatever was there was circling us. I thought maybe it was an animal, a raccoon or a bear. But as the night wore on, it didn't feel right. I kept feeling this intense pressure in my chest, like I was being watched. My heart was pounding like crazy. Around midnight, the whispers started. I don't know how to explain it. It was too soft at first, too distant to make out. Just a faint voice, a low murmur. It felt like it was coming from all directions. I couldn't tell if it was just the wind playing tricks on me, or if it was something real. But it wasn't a human voice. Not quite. It wasn't like any voice I'd ever heard before. "Did you hear that?" Derek whispered, his eyes wide. I didn't want to say it, but I had to. "Yeah, I hear it." The whispers stopped as suddenly as they started. Then came the snapping twigs, and I mean loud snaps, as if someone or something was walking just outside our camp, stepping on branches on purpose. Now you'd think that would be enough to make us all bolt, but we didn't. We stayed put, like idiots, convincing ourselves it was nothing. Maybe it was the wind, maybe it was an animal, but every time that sound got closer, every time that whispering started again, the more we all felt like there was something wrong out there. And then it got worse. Around 2 a.m. Chris was sitting by the fire staring at the dark woods. I swear I saw him flinch. He looked like he saw something move. "What is it?" Jenny asked, voice trembling. Chris didn't answer. His eyes were wide, locked on the trees. That's when we all saw it. A figure, just a shape, barely visible in the shadows, but it was tall, unnaturally tall. And it moved with this eerie fluidity, almost like it wasn't even walking. I couldn't breathe. My legs were shaking. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my ears. "Matt, let's leave. Now." But we didn't leave. We couldn't move. It felt like we were paralyzed, stuck in place by something we couldn't understand. The figure moved deeper into the woods. And just like that, the noise stopped. The whispers, the scratching, everything. It was like the forest was holding its breath. We stayed there on edge for what felt like hours. But nothing happened. No more figures, no more sounds. It was quiet, too quiet. By morning, I had never been more ready to leave. We packed up the camp in complete silence, not one of us willing to even glance at the woods. I haven't been back to Hollow Pines since, and I don't think I ever will.